We're going to talk about section 9.1, quadratic equations and parabolas. A quadratic equation is just a function that generates a particular curve that we call parabolas, and they look like this. Now, I made a mistake earlier with my initial take on this video, so rather than getting a new sheet of paper, I'm just going to kind of work through the notes here that I've already written down. Sorry about that. The first piece of the parabola that I want to talk about is called the vertex. Every parabola has a vertex. In this case, it is a maximum because it's the top of the curve. If this parabola was open in this direction, opening up, then it would have a minimum. It would have a bottom. Okay, so we circled that this one has a maximum because it's the high point, has a highest point, I guess you would say. And this is where the vertex is located. The vertex here is at -3, 2. So you just write that down. The axis of symmetry is a line that cuts the parabola in half. Okay, this is so the axis of symmetry here is located at x equals -3. So you go over 1, 2, 3, and you can see there's the axis of symmetry. Typically, we write that in as a dotted line. Okay, so the axis of symmetry is at x equals -3, and it's always going to be written as x equals wherever the vertex is, because it's a vertical line, not horizontal. The min or max value, well, this is going to be at y equals 2. It's a maximum value, and it's the highest point of the parabola, and so that's at y equals 2, and that's where it is. That's the value vertically. Right? The domain is going to be all real numbers, and remember that the domain is all of the x values that have y values. In other words, it's all of the inputs that also have outputs. And the way that you know that the domain is all real numbers is because every number that you can plug in to this function, there will be no errors. So you can plug in 1, -17, 1,000, pi, whatever you want to plug in for x, it doesn't matter. There will always be a value for y. Another way to think about this is that this graph, this parabola, will cover every single x value possible. So every value to the left, every value to the right will be covered by the parabola. Okay, so the domain is all real numbers. The range is all the y values that the graph covers. Okay, so if you look at the parabola, it's going to go down forever, right? This parabola is going to go down through infinity. But as far as the y values are concerned, it will only go to y equals 2. That's the highest y value. All right, so for the range, we're going to put that the range is y less than or equal to 2. Okay, for instance, y equals 5 will not be in the range because the parabola does not go above 5, or excuse me, does not go above 2. So we would say that 5 is not in the range. So basically, just look at the parabola, figure out where the top or the bottom, the min or the max is located, and that will tell you what the range is. Again, the y values that the graph covers. The y-intercept is where does the graph hit the y-axis. That's what y-intercept means. Where does the curve intersect the y-axis? So if you look at the curve here, you'll see that it crosses the y-axis at 0, -7. So now let's talk about just let's kind of put together all of the definitions on this one sheet of paper. So you've got it all in one spot with small diagrams as well. The vertex is a point that doesn't repeat, and what that means is that this y value, for example, right here and here, those y values are going to repeat. There's a y value that is -2 here. There's also one right here, but one value won't be repeated. This one won't be. The vertex won't be. The vertex is also the highest or lowest point on the graph. And again, we typically write h, k for the vertex. I mentioned that up here briefly. All right, where do you find it? Take a look at the graph. It's the easiest way. All right, you can also look at the graph and look for the point that doesn't repeat. That's another way. Excuse me, look at the table and look for that point that doesn't repeat. That will also tell you where the vertex is. The axis of symmetry, next thing we want to talk about. The axis of symmetry splits the graph in half. Right? We already briefly mentioned that. So it splits the graph in half. All right, and it is usually represented by a vertical line. We already mentioned that up here. Usually a dotted vertical line, and because it's not actually part of the parabola, and it acts kind of like a mirror. Okay, we usually will write that line as x equals h. Okay, it's wherever the x value of the vertex is. So the x value of the vertex. Okay, a maximum is just the highest point on the graph. Okay. And there will be a maximum if the equation looks like this, negative out in front of it. So negative ax squared plus bx plus c. If we just draw kind of a random picture, looks something like this, you can see that we have a maximum, a high point on the curve. A minimum is just the lowest point on the graph. Lowest point on the graph. And here's a little sketch. This has a minimum, so there's a low point on the parabola, and that equation will have a positive in front of it. So notice that if it's negative in front, it will open down, and if it's positive in front, right here, it will open up. Right? The max and the min value are just the point of the max and the min. So point of the max or min. Usually we'll write y equals k. That'll tell you what the y value is. Again, the k is the y value of the vertex. The domain, remember the domain is all the x values, all the x values covered by the graph. All right, for all of our parabolas, they're going to be, the domain will be all real numbers. We write this fancy R. Or you can just write all real numbers. The range is all the y values covered by the graph. All right. And then if it's a min, then it's going to be y is greater than or equal to k. And if there's a max, then it's going to be y is less than or equal to k. And let's move this up here. And then the y-intercept, this is where the graph crosses the y-axis. Let's try that again. The y-axis. All right, and this will always take the form 0, comma, something, as it will always be on the y-axis, which means that happens when x is equal to 0. So these are all the important definitions relating to quadratic equations and parabolas. The more of these that you do, and the the better you'll get at them, just like anything else. You'll get to be more comfortable with the vocabulary the more you practice it.